Hey, what's up? I'm Liz, the Split City DIY, and today is finally the day that we do the Windows benchmarks for the budget Ryzen PC. If you watched the build video, you'll know that we had a bit of a RAM problem. I had to RMA a stick of RAM. That RMA went through, came back, and when I popped in the new stick, sure enough, it worked. The RAM stick was the issue. So now we have 8 beautiful gigs of Corsair Vengeance RAM in this PC. And speaking of parts, also in this system, just to go over again, we've got the Ryzen 5 1400 CPU, GTX 1050 Ti, ASRock B350 chipset motherboard, a Western Digital Blue SSD holding all of the storage for the system. We're also going with a stock Wraith cooler on that CPU, and a Corsair 450 watt power supply. And now just a quick note on the testing methodology for these benchmarks. If you've seen other benchmark videos by me, you know that for synthetic benchmarks, I run each test 3 times, then take the average, and that's the score that you see. For gaming, I use Fraps on PC, and that gives you the minimum, maximum, and average frame rate per second. For synthetic benchmarks for this system, since this is a mid-range system, I decided to run the highest end, so like the ultra setting or whatever the highest, most difficult tests in the synthetics are, and also the medium setting as well, since the medium's really what you should be throwing the system against, not the ultra. But I also want to give you an idea of how this is stacking up with the highest possible load. For gaming, I did 30-minute gaming sessions with all the settings and all the games on high to give you an idea of what the maxed out performance you're going to get as far as frame rates go with all the settings turned up. That way, if you know that you are someone that you want like more frames per second, then you can always lower settings in game and know that you'll get a higher FPS that way. And another thing, none of these parts are overclocked. I left everything at stock. That way you know exactly how this equipment is going to perform without any bells and whistles that you may not be able to personally achieve. You're going to just see the raw performance that all of this stuff can do at stock. And the reason why I do this is that's how I like to see benchmarks personally. Then I know exactly what the hardware can do on its own without any tweaks or anything like that, especially where I've parted this out to be a budget build, just in case anyone's watching that's maybe considering building a gaming PC for the first time. Maybe they won't feel as comfortable overclocking, or they just won't feel that like maybe their PSU is a bit on the cheaper end or anything like that. Then they'll know exactly what they can get from these parts, just hooking them all up and turning them on. And another thing about the games I chose today, I chose because this system will be running Ubuntu at the end of the day. If you watch the build video, you'll know that. And the games I chose are also available on Linux in Steam, so that way when we switch operating systems, we'll be able to do a cross comparison between the Windows versus Linux performance on those games, see if there are any differences. So with all that out of the way, let's get into the benchmark results. Starting off with the Unigine Classic Heaven benchmark, the Ryzen system had an average score of 1645 on Ultra and 2128 on Medium. I also tested the newest Unigine benchmark, Superposition, which is a crazy intense test. On Ultra, the system had an average of 1304, and on Medium, an average score of 5266. The Unigine tests are also available for Linux, so we'll be able to see performance across operating systems with these, which I'm really excited about. Next up is Cinebench, with an average CPU score of 697 and an average GPU score of 76. I ran the 3D Mark suite since they really won me over during my Android benchmarking with the Asus Tinkerboard. Time Spy is the DirectX 12 test, and it had an average score of 2373. Next up was Firestrike, which has 3 difficulty settings. Ultra, the hardest one, the system had an average of 1752. Extreme, 3475, and your basic Firestrike had an average of 6706. The last one that I ran doesn't get tested too often by the big benchmarkers on YouTube, but seeing as this is a mid-range budget system, I decided to run Skydiver, which is meant for systems like this Ryzen PC. In that test, it scored an average of 18,974. The last of the synthetics was Geekbench. Geekbench also has a Linux port, so we'll be able to compare these scores later. For single-core CPU, this build had an average of 3820. Multi-core score of 12,866, and for the GPU in OpenCL, an average score of 85,537. Now for games. First up was Rocket League, one of my personal favorites with a minimum frame rate of 103, max of 183, and an average of 133. Next, the classic Portal 2, an older game at this point, but still definitely entertaining. It has a minimum frame rate of 185, a max of 290, and an average of 284. The nice thing about older games is that even budget systems with the new architectures available can tear through them, and you can get some really nice results. Cities Skylines has a minimum frame rate of 45, max of 74, and average of 61. Anecdotally, I noticed the FPS decrease when zooming in and out a lot, but definitely still playable. Again, all settings are on high here, so if you need a higher FPS, settings can be decreased. And finally, CSGO. It had a minimum frame rate of 72, max of 295, and an average of 165. Again, anecdotally, I can't quite say when that lower frame rate occurred, but my guess would be during a menu load between matches, since I didn't notice anything during gameplay. I know that hardcore CSGO players want those super high frame rates, so again, settings can be dropped to achieve that. This was on the highest possible settings. Alright, so that's going to wrap things up for the Windows benchmark for this budget Ryzen build. Again, most of the choices I made as far as testing went, with the idea that this will be running Ubuntu in the end. So we're looking at these Windows benchmarks, kind of a baseline to compare to once we switch operating systems for this PC. And I have to say, I'm really impressed with the Ryzen architecture and the GTX 1050 Ti. In my own rig, I have a GTX 1060 and a Haswell Error i5, and I have to say, I found the performance to be definitely comparable. So if you're looking for a budget gaming build spec'd out, I definitely recommend these parts. I think it's a really amazing performance per dollar, and I think AMD is also definitely back in the game as far as computers go, and I've just been so impressed seeing the results of Ryzen, of all the other videos everywhere, and I'm glad that I'm going to be going on an Ubuntu Linux adventure with this platform. So next up, I will be doing Ubuntu benchmarks. I'll probably also do a quick video on how to set up Ubuntu as your main operating system, if that's something you're into. But that's going to do it for this video today. If you'd like to toss me a thumbs up, leave any questions or comments down below. Find me on social media, links are in the description. Thank you for watching. Consider subscribing for more content like this. And until next time, this has been Blitz City DIY.